This is the Norris Group's Real Estate Investor Radio Show, the award-winning show dedicated to thought leaders shaping the real estate industry and local experts revealing their insider tips to succeed in an ever-changing real estate market. Hosted by author, investor, and hard money lender, Bruce Norris.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Bruce Norris. Today, our special guest is Tony Alvarez. Tony is a real estate investor, property manager, teacher, mentor, and most importantly, he's a good friend of mine. Tony, how you doing?
I'm doing great, actually. I cannot complain about anything. Everything in my life seems to be exactly where I can't even say exactly where I want it to be, but it's like I'm being ushered along, regardless of whatever else is happening in the world. My life seems to be just fine.
Well, you've gone through some stuff in the last couple of months. So
oh, yeah.
How are you feeling? You had open heart surgery, for God's sakes.
Well, yeah. And it was, a lot of people, when you say open heart surgery, they immediately think it's bypass surgery, which nowadays is pretty much like getting, your teeth cleaned. But that was not my situation. My situation is what they call aortic aneurysm caused by a bicuspid valve. In my aortic valve was bicuspid, and that's an issue that I had since I was born. It's instead of having 3 little flaps, it had 2 little flaps, and so the blood comes out of my heart into my body with force, just like when you hold down a faucet or a hose. You put your thumb on a hose and it causes some damage. But it was caught by accident. It was caught during a physical that a yearly physical that I have, which included an echocardiogram, which is like what they do for women when they're pregnant, to see the little baby and all that. And they found I had this issue, and they went back in the test before a year back and found that I had it from 12 months before.
Yeah,
but was never caught by the cardiologist. So it's been, I had everything done. I traveled down back to California and I had everything done at Cedars-Sinai and all that with a marvelous surgeon, Dr. Trento. And so far, so good. It's a series of thresholds that I have to go through. If you pass the surgery and then you get the first 30 days in the first year and then 5 years. But with the exception of some limitations that I had initially, and I still have some, which are just, due to the surgery itself, because it's pretty serious stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, if I explain the surgery to you, when I try not to think about it, I try not to think about it too much, because the procedure I have actually has a name. It's called the Bentall procedure, Bentall. And you go online and you just Google Bentall procedure, and there's a nice little graphic of what it was, with color and everything, and like a little animated thing. And it shows
you had the one that they purposely stopped your heart, right?
Well, yeah, they do that. Yeah, they stopped my heart for, it was almost like between 4 and 5 hours, and they get you hooked up to a heart and lung machine. And I think that's also typical of when they do some more serious surgeries. And it affects you, they tell you you're going to have some emotional ups and downs, and that's a side effect of having this type of surgery for many reasons, but also because your blood is going through this machine, which apparently can cause some damage to the platelets, temporary. And so when it goes through your brain and stuff like that, you end up having some weird, little things. I was watching myself, and it was quite an interesting process. Yeah, but I'm on the mend. They
oh my God. Well, I'm glad you're
4 to 5 inches of my aorta were actually, cut at both places, and they put a piece of Dacron. And this is a funny thing. Okay, I'm reading up, I'm studying, because I can't help myself. I have to analyze everything, right? So I'm studying up on how they came up with this idea. A surgeon came up with this years ago, when he was sitting in his living room, looking at his living room, frustrated because he couldn't figure out a way to help his patients that had this issue. And he looks up and he sees his wife's curtain rod, and he looks at the curtains, and he gets up there, tears the curtain down, and decides that there's a piece of, it's Dacron. It's just a piece of Dacron. And he decides, he gets the idea from the curtain thing, the sleeve, that this is exactly what they need to do. And so he got the idea from looking at his wife's curtain. So I basically have a curtain thing in my cart somewhere working, and it's doing a great job.
When,
Yeah.
when I think of you, I just want you to, what comes to mind first is your ability to garner people's support and love. I've seen you do that, when you deal with REO agents. That's a very competitive environment. I guess I'm wondering, do you feel some of that is by a lot of training, or do you feel some of that is innate to who you are? I'm really curious, because I have a buddy named Alex who happens to be Cuban too.
Yes, yes.
And he's very similar in that he gets people to do the most absurd things willingly, like they're team partners. And
Yeah.
it's hilarious to watch him operate, but it's not really like it's not even a game to him. It's almost an expectation that he has that of course they'll help. So I just wondered what was your perspective on that? Because you get people to do things.
This year, with the political stuff that we had and all that, I got to see this Cuban guy who somehow made it to one of these gatherings that they had, and it was pretty public. And he stood up and spoke, and he actually spoke, I think, at the Republican convention or something. He was up there, had a really heavy Cuban accent. And the guy actually brought me to tears, speaking about his past and this and that and Cuban and all that stuff. But what I got to see, because I asked that same question of myself over the years, and you're the one who got me started on that trip. Thank you very much. When you asked me to speak for the first time, and I had to become very introspective, because I'm thinking, I haven't done it. I never thought of anything that I've ever done as anything out of the ordinary, except just work hard, and kind of know where I wanted to go and deal with the bumps along the way. But this man got up and he was speaking, and he had such clear thinking and determination, and in his thought process and in his actions, as he's explaining about his past and what he's experienced in this. And I realized that that's a theme that runs through Cubans, period. I hate to generalize it that way, because, anytime you generalize anything nowadays, people think you're nuts. But I don't think I've ever met too many Cubans that went through some of the things, that Cuba's a very, the island is in its history, it's just very tumultuous. If you didn't have a revolution every so many years, it's like a hurricane that comes every season. It's just expected. So there's a level of survival. There's a survival instinct, and then also one of camaraderie, because whenever you deal with any kind of upheaval or adversity, though, you either expect everyone to be on your team, and or you're going to have a really hard time getting through whatever it is that you're getting through. I remember when Reagan he got shot, and they said he went into they wheeled him into the operating room or whatever at the hospital. I forget the name of the hospital, at the military hospital. And the first thing he said when he looked up and he saw all these guys with masks on, he goes, "I hope you're all Republicans." So the assumption is, and everybody laughed, of course, is, hey, you're all here to help me accomplish my goals. And I think that runs through me very in a very natural way. And I think if I think back, I think that's it's a cultural thing. But it also starts with your own family dynamics. My mother was extremely supportive, and she told us, and I've commented this before on stage. It stayed with me forever. I mean, my mom is still with us, and I speak to her every single day. So my mom would tell us, we'd be leaving for school, for Catholic school, first thing in the morning, right? We're living in a city where there's absolutely no other Cubans. There's just Italians and Irish and everybody else. And it's just our family. No one else speaks Spanish except for the pastor at the Catholic church at the school that we were allowed to attend. And she says, remember this. She used to bend down to us. She said, remember, in this life, you could be friends. You can meet and make friends with anyone, no matter how rich or powerful or whoever they are, as long as you learn to love people first. And, when we were kids, we used to think, mom's nuts, because to us, you're a kid, love means you kiss a girl on the mouth or whatever, see, it didn't quite settle in. But as time went by, my mom would take us with her wherever she went. She went to speak to the priest. She would take us with us. And she always would point at her face before we walk in. She would turn to us. We're all standing there like a little tribe. And she'd go like this. And so we would ask, we would all smile. And she would say, whenever you go to visit someone, always bring something. But if you don't have anything, if you're poor, bring a smile, bring an optimistic attitude. You don't want to walk in going, oh, we're poor, geez, can you help us? And she says that doesn't go anywhere. So you bring, you bring the best of yourself. And so you can't get hammered with that every single day as a kid. See your mom do it everywhere she goes. She's friends with everyone. I mean, I want to tell you something just briefly. I got bounced out of high school one time for skipping too many classes. Okay, I just want you to know. I mean, I walk in, I get called down to the guy's office. I forget what they call it, and I go down there, and Mr. Kennedy. I walk in, he goes, "You're out." I said, "What?" He goes, "You're out of here. You're suspended. You've been late for your first homeroom class." I was so dumb that I would be late for homeroom, or I would skip it, and then I would go to my class. So I'm showing 300 days absent, right? So I said, you can't do that. My mother will kill me. She'll be disappointed. No, you're out of here. I don't want to see you again until I speak to your parents. I leave, and across the street from the high school was this park, the Lawrence Common. I go there, and I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I can't tell my mother I got bounced out of school. My dad's a fit, right? So I raise my eyes, and I look across the street, and I look, and I see City Hall. Well, I said, that's it. I made a beeline for City Hall, and I went straight up and asked to speak with the head of public safety, Mr. Donovan. Now, I want you to know, we knew that man. My mom was involved in supporting him for politics, and the guy who was there, Louis Giarusso, I knew him. I went to school with his son. I walk in, I said, I need to speak to Mr. Donovan. He goes, Tony, what are you doing out of school? I said, listen, this is a small town. I said, I got to speak to Mr. Donovan. I just got bounced out of school. He said, you got bounced? And he smiles at me. He goes, sit down. So he goes and disappears into this big, awesome, room and all this. And he goes inside, and then he comes out and he goes, Mr. Donovan's going to see you, but I don't know about you. And I go in, I sit down. There's this man behind this desk. It was so overwhelmingly ominous to me at the time. So I'm sitting there, and he says, Tony, what's happening? How's your mother? I said, she's very good, but I said, I have to ask you a favor. And he said, what? I said, I had a problem at school, and I got thrown out. He said, why did you get thrown out of school? He said, because I said, well, I skipped classes, or, I was late. No. He says, Kennedy, Mr. Kennedy? I said, yes. He goes, well, hold on a second. And he picks up the phone and he starts dialing this guy. Okay. Now, I want you to know, this guy on the other end answers the phone, right? Finally gets on the phone. He's got him on a speaker thing in the room. And this was years ago, where it was like a box, and you could hear everything from a mile away. And he says, Joe, this is Mr. Donovan. Hey, how you doing? How's it going? Yeah, I got a young man in here, Tony Alvarez. Tony Alvarez. He goes, yeah. He says he just got bounced out of school, and I know his mom, and he goes, oh my goodness, no, well, no. That's it's not a big thing. He goes, well, I know his mother. No, send him back. We're fine. He can go. No. Well, no, Joe, I'm not asking you for a favor here. I'm not asking you for a favor. I'm just saying, no, that's not a favor. No, I get it. Send him back. So he hangs up the phone. Now, this man is in shock because he was a really fine man. he did not anticipate, he wasn't really asking the guy for a favor. And he was, and the other guy on the other phone, he never said anything to him. He just said, hey, I got this guy, this young man in my office. I know his mother. And he just assumed everything else. Now I go back to school. I walk in and Mr. Kennedy looks at me with a big smile on his face. He goes, well, I didn't know your family knows Mr. Donovan. And I said, well, he goes, go back to school. We're okay. All right, go back to school. Just don't skip your class. Will you at home, bro? You're giving me a headache. Okay, go back. Okay. Now, I cannot tell you what in me possessed me to think that I could walk into that office and speak to a guy who really had a lot more important things to do than to deal with something like that. But I didn't think anything of it. In other words, I thought nothing at all because in my mind, there was some kind of injustice that had been done to Tony Alvarez, you know. And the truth of the matter is that it wasn't. I was guilty, you know.
I get it. Let's put it on a scale. Disappointing mom or facing like the mayor. Oh, yeah. We'll take the mayor.
I could not disappoint my mom. There was no way I was going home. I'd rather sleep out in the park for the rest of my life than go home and tell my mother I got out of school. So that, in all honesty, that's run through my life. Just like when I came up to Oregon, and you had discussed at one of your seminars about checking out doing new construction and stuff like that. Well, I really didn't have a lot of experience doing any of that, and you mentioned Florida and Oregon as two states that at the time had net migrations, positive net migration. And so I thought, wow, I've been coming to Oregon for 20 some odd years, and I never thought of really investing in real estate up here except my own home. It was like my retreat. It's a place I, get away to get away from real estate and all that kind of stuff. So I started looking around for, an older home on a larger lot or something, to see if I could get it split up. And, next thing I know, I don't know anything about this, nothing. I don't know the first thing about developing anything. I had only built 2 houses in Southern California, and I didn't build anything. I just hired a contractor, had a lot. I said, hey, get out there and do whatever you guys do. And he had a plan from a previous house he was building, and he built me 2 houses, and they were fabulous. We made some astronomical amount of money. It's like $160,000 on each one or something. Anyways, I get up here before you know it. I'm asking the guy who was my property manager at the time, and that didn't last very long. I said, do you know anybody? Oh, you got to get an engineer. I said, you know anybody? Yeah, I got this guy, Gerlitz. I go see him. Wonderful person. I said, do you know, I got to get a contractor. Oh yeah, I got these guys that are contractors. Next time he's referring me. Of course, these are people that are established here that are the cream of the crop in this town.
Right.
And they all know each other, right? I mean, birds of a feather, right? So I'm being introduced. These doors are being opened to me one by one. And I walk in, I'm passing through saying, hey, you're up. Now I got this team. I never forget the first meeting we had at the engineer's office. There were all these people in there. And I actually sat back while they were talking among each other. I sat back and I looked at them, and I took a moment where I was actually out of that room. And I was thinking about all of this stuff ran through my head. Living in Lawrence, coming from Cuba, my mother talking. I mean, all of it it was like it all came together. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting in this room and I'm really doing nothing. I just brought these people together because I had an idea that you put in my mind, to be honest, to develop something. And all of a sudden I got this team of guys in my office that are making this happen. Now, I'm pushing that cart along. There's no denying that. It's my level of determination that's going to get this started and is going to get it completed, because believe me, we've run into some stuff where, I discovered granite in the middle of what we're supposed to be developing. And I had to bring in a crane. They were talking, we might need dynamite, and this is the middle of town. And I'm and I can't tell you how many people said, you need to shut this down. You need to forget about this. This is too costly. It's going to make the project. Now, something in me, the minute you say that, something in me goes, this is exciting. You know what I'm saying? This just became really fun. and finding a way to get it done. And we got it done. And we found a company out of Portland who said, you don't need dynamite. We've got new technology. We can hammer that thing out. It's not as costly as you think. And we had set aside, thank goodness, due to the great contractor that we had set aside contingency funds for whatever. And it was fine. And we're getting those things done right now, 11 lots, So I think it's a combination of things, what the type of heart someone has that they bring to whatever it is that they're doing, the level of determination, but the heart behind it, we've often talked about that. What's the steam behind the engine that drives someone to fulfill the dream that they have or the desire that they have, because you might have a certain level of desire to get started in the race, right?
Right.
And then you trip or something happens along the way. Well, what keeps you going? What keeps you going? It's got to be a certain level of belief or confidence that you're going to get this thing done. It's got to, there's a way to get it done. And, I think that comes from historically dealing with adversity. I mean, how difficult do you think it is for me to deal with something that comes up in business or something and sit back and realize we just need to find a way to get this done? When I compare it to my parents, who have been the two biggest mentors of my life, deciding to come from Cuba, which, by the way, just deciding to leave Cuba at that time was a huge risk. Right. Because it was, you could just as easily get the visa to leave or approved to leave with nothing in your hands. You had just the clothes you're wearing, or you could be arrested and thrown into political prison and stay in there for the rest of your existence, to be honest, because we had family members that suffered that. So, and it was a total gamble. And you got all your kids with you. You don't speak the language. You're going to land in a place you don't know. The only thing you're looking forward to is the freedom of knowing when you get here, you don't have to worry about speaking your mind and getting shot in the head, for just speaking your mind. So, and that's why a lot of, you'll see films of people that come to this country that the minute they land here, the first thing they do is kiss the ground. So, you come through all of these things, right? And now you're looking at granite in the middle of it. Whenever I've confronted something that at the moment may seem like it's insurmountable or whatever, I go back. I usually go home and I end up thinking of my parents, and I end up reminding myself where I came from. And all of a sudden, it's like it puts it right into place.
Have you ever had I used to have a card for just like that, what you're saying, where those instances where you were successful when there was no way that you were supposed to be. And the power of somebody in your life is really important. I'll tell you just a story. I had to take a fireman's test. Now, I come from a family of very skilled athletes. My dad was a very skilled athlete. My brother was a world-class black belt in karate. While he was taking karate and already a black belt, and I was basically the pacifist in the family, but the expectation was there that if you were going to play athletics or whatever, you were serious. Well, there was a fireman test, physical agility fireman test that I went to go take. And probably 300-400 people took it, but it was pouring rain that day. And 100% of us failed on the first go around because you couldn't hold on to these silly bars that were hanging down. Well, one guy decided to hold on to both bars with two hands, the bar with two hands, and then go to the next one. And by the way, I didn't leave after I failed because I couldn't go home. Same reason. I couldn't walk up to my brother and say, I failed the physical agility test. It wasn't a sentence that could be uttered at my house. And so I literally sat against the fence looking at that obstacle for the 2 or 3 hours before I could retake it. And I did it. And when I came home, he says, so how'd it go? And there were 400 people took it, 25 passed it. And he says, you were one of them, right? It was like, yes.
Yeah, that's expected. Exactly.
It was, but I wish I could have said a sentence like to embellish the outcome, but the outcome for him was, of course.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you
It's an afterthought. You have to pass that thing.
That's right. Well, that's why you went across the street rather than to face your mom. The expectation
Absolutely.
level was there's no worse trip than going to see mom. I've got to go solve it
Yeah.
some other way. That's cool. I like that. Well, I don't know
Yeah.
if you,
So
I don't know if,
I think,
I don't know if you,
no, go ahead.
if you don't have that embedded, it seems like it's possible to garner it. You know, you'd really have to concentrate and say, okay, I've got these instances in my life where I really did something that was unusual and difficult, and I'm going to make sure I remember that about me. And here's another one, you know, like here's another one. Okay, I'll look at this
And
list.
I would just, I want to just inject something in here because I want to make sure that I'm clear about what I'm explaining. Because sometimes I get so hyper focused in my mind, and I see things in very vivid pictures in my mind, in my imagination. I'm able to go back and see these moments with my mother or this or that, and it's almost like they're happening right now. I've always been very grateful to have that ability within my own mind, But I want, because I realize I forget that people will hear this conversation. It's not just us speaking, and that thought just came to mind. And I have to share something because my mother's sharing of this with us. We're five brothers. I mean, you have five brothers in a family. You're going to have a variety of outcomes, right?
Right.
Not everyone is going to grab the brass ring, so to speak, and not everybody wants to. I have brothers that heard the same words I heard, that are not that, they don't have such big dreams or any, they're okay, but the most important thing for people to understand is what is the inherent potential that we are born with. That's what my mother was reaching into. She was looking at all of us. Not because we're the same, but because she knew from her own life, whatever she had already gone through and all the adversities that she had overcome, that we are all endowed with the potential to do whatever it is that we choose to do, bar whatever occurs. It doesn't, and you see this all the time. We see this, and sometimes we look at it, we're entertained by it, or we're impressed by it. You see a young man who goes off to the military. I love the military. This has such an impact on me. They go, he's a young strapping guy, married to maybe his first child or whatever, goes off to some war or something that we have going on, comes back with no legs. No legs. Now, I don't care, no arm, his face destroyed from a fire. I mean, it's just, and you compare that to granite, finding granite on your thing.
Right.
And now these guys have to confront their lives. The stories that you read, because I really get, he speaks to his wife and says, honey, you didn't sign up for this. You don't have to stay. I mean, this is real stuff. This isn't like, somebody wrote this like some Christmas story. This is real life stuff. And you see these guys overcome this, and they say they go through depression and they can't, and then they finally decide to do this. Now you want to talk about deciding to do something for financial reasons? Wake the hell up.
Yeah.
I mean, dude, what limitations could we possibly as individuals have when you see these young people and you see one after the other, different backgrounds, different religious beliefs, different family structures, different placements within the families, whether they're born the youngest or the oldest or the guy in the middle or whatever it is, male, female alike, right? And they choose in the moment to become more than they've been up until that point of their lives. There's no limitations. There's really no limitations except the only ones that something in our minds brings up, and then we accept it. And we say, okay, that's it. I'm parking here. I'm getting off. I'm not gonna. That's it. That's as far as I can take it. So I think that's the beautiful part of our lives is that, people, say, I'm trying to, I want to. How do I get financially free or financially independent? Or listen, that's minuscule compared to what you can accomplish in this life. And you're right when you say, do people have an impact? You know, you see a guy grab the bar with both hands and you go, hello? You know,
Hadn't thought of that one.
you okay? Okay, yeah, I'm going. And that's I'll thank him later. So Bruce Norris says to Tony Alvarez, hey, I know you're out there busy working, you know, would you like to speak at this thing I'm doing? What? I never spoken to anybody. I don't even do lunches. You know, I don't talk, not because I didn't want to share what I said, because I would stop. I'm going through a drive-through restaurant and some guy says, oh, hey, Tony, or whatever, or sees me reading something about real estate. Oh, what do you do? I'm a real estate guy. Next thing you know, I'm doing a seminar at the drive-up window with Carl's Jr., right? And the people behind me start honking, right? So it wasn't for that reason, but you know, you brought something into my life, and you, as you always have, you know, ideas that you bring, and you recognize, if you're smart enough, if you wake up, you recognize these people have put into your life. You know, Bruce Norris was put into Tony Alvarez's life for a very specific reason, and not by accident. I don't believe that at all. And may I say at this moment, the reverse is also true. I remember when Bruce Norris was not such a big hugger. Okay, but Aaron Norris was.
Yeah.
You know, I remember meeting Aaron and thinking to myself, the first thing Aaron did when he saw me, he opened his arms to give me a hug, and I thought, wow, this guy's related to me. You know, so yeah, so isn't it funny how we all, you know, we intertwine somehow into each other's lives, and we help each other to be more than what we were at that moment. Somehow we find, but where do we find these things? We might see them outside of ourselves, but we find them within ourselves, you know. So
there's a Christmas present that I get my family. Every family unit gets a box, a tin of candy. Whoop.
No, I'm here.
Okay. Gets a tin of candy from a military man that lost limbs and so forth. And he started a candy business. And so he has his story on his website. So I print his story, and it's like 4 pages of his story. At the end of it, he basically says, I just want my children to know that anything is possible.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. So, and it's great candy too, by the way. So, yeah.
Where do you get that? You'll have to tell me that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
All right, thank you very much.
I got 20 boxes of it sitting, about to go on an airplane trip Friday.
That would be marvelous. I would love to follow suit on that.
Okay. Yeah, that was pretty cool. When I saw his story, he was on like a Squawk Box or something, telling his story. So I thought, oh my gosh, okay, well, I'm gonna support that. And I've done it ever since, every year. So
very cool. So,
you know, Jim Rohn taught me a long time ago. He says, the how is easy if the why is big enough.
Right.
And that's kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
Everybody has, like I said, the beginning question, which we've been on for a while, but it's important because you're able to garner people's support. Part of it is that you're probably the best time they ever have. When you walk in, they know we're about to have some fun. We're about to laugh. We're about to smile. That's not normal, right?
Well, I agree. Yeah, most of them, even the business people, you know, and it's different because doing business in Los Angeles, you know, like when I was in Santa Monica and Burbank and all that, and then I went out to the Antelope Valley. And the Antelope Valley was a much smaller market, but yeah, comparatively speaking, it was pretty good compared to here, you know. And then you come up here, and it's Grants Pass is not Medford, Oregon. Medford is more like the San Fernando Valley. Grants Pass is a very tiny market, and what I found is that people that do business in Grants Pass don't go to Medford. They just do. To them, going to Medford is like driving to the big city. That's where the Costco is, you know. It's like a 20-minute drive. Okay.
Oh my God.
Drive. Yeah, but no, that's once a week thing, you know. They only do that once in a while. And so you start very sensitive. You start realizing they're very sensitive to their reputations, what somebody says, what doesn't say, you know, the bank, who you're dealing with. And I've had some experience here, and I don't want to get into all of them, but I had some experiences here that were really kind of unsettling sometimes. I, at the beginning, you know, brought my California mind up here, and I'm at the local bank, and I specifically chose Evergreen Bank. By the way, that's where I actually borrowed their name years ago from my company when I was up here. Yeah, I thought it was a lovely name, and I thought, you know, this will work really well in the Antelope Valley because everything there was high desert and desert this and that. I thought Evergreen, that'll bring a new picture to someone's mind, you know, and on my card will have little trees and stuff, you know. And I actually, you know, I had an experience where when I got up here and I was doing a lot of 1031 exchanges and I was very demanding. Now, this is supposed to be the oldest and biggest bank here in town. There was a moment in time where the manager there asked me to take my business elsewhere. Okay. Now,
Okay.
to Tony Alvarez, the person who sees himself as the loving, hugging, friend of everyone, relationship making guy, that was a shock to the system of monumental proportions.
Wow.
I cannot tell you, I was beside myself. And I came home, and he did it. He sent me a text, I need to see you right away. I went by, I saw him, I walked in, he said, I think we need to make a change. This isn't really working out for us, this, that, and the other thing. And he didn't get into specifics. And I walked out of there, I said, are you asking me to leave? He goes, yes, I think it's better if you find yourself another bank. I don't think we have, you know, this relationship isn't going in the direction we thought. I walked out speechless. Now, I leave that bank and I'm driving and I'm in shock. I tell you honestly, Bruce, in shock. And I drive and I see this new building I've been looking at being built all summer long. And it was a new bank. And I go into that bank and it's called People's Bank, just so you know.
Okay.
I go in there and I drive in and I get out. Now I'm thinking, hey, the heck with it. You know, I'm not gonna, if they don't like my business. I was hurt. Honestly, I was heartbroken because that's never happened to me. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
I've never been fired as a client. Okay. So I walk in and I ask to speak to someone and I get to speak to this wonderful guy. And I go in there and I always, you know how I always carry all my notes with me of all the properties I own. I always carry my spreadsheets. I haven't changed. Okay. I'm still the same person. I still carry, and I have that with me. Right. And it shows my loans, my interest rate, you know, everything. And I walk in and I sit down with the guy and says, look, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I'm looking for a new bank. And I really, you know, I need to make a change because, you know, and I said, well, let me just show you this. And I show him the spreadsheet. I said, this is what I got these projects and all this stuff. And he says, yes, he says, wow, you know, he says, but Tony, I just have one question. He said, because he knew the bank. He said, he asked me, I said, yeah, it's the bank. He goes, I don't know if I can even touch these rates. He says, why would you ever decide to leave? You know, they're a good bank, you know. And I said, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I was just asked to leave. And he said, you were asked to leave? I said, yeah. And he, oddly enough, is good friends with the guy who fired me. He said, he asked you to leave? I said, yeah, I don't know what's going on, whatever. Well, what ends up happening is, and I end up developing a relationship. And by the way, there was many years ago, just to show you how this town is. Many years ago, I was being interviewed by you like this on the radio show. And someone had called into the radio show and said, hey, they wanted to speak with me. I remember Aaron calling me and saying, someone called into the radio show and wants to speak with you. Do you mind if we give them your contact? I said, no, give them my number, whatever, you know. And this wonderful man calls me and ends up sending me a book that he had written about himself and his wife. And they were in the real estate business up here. Turns out that his father had also written a book about his father had gotten started in the business many, many years ago. Wonderful man who's since passed, but I got the opportunity to meet him. make a long story short, I get a call after I meet that guy at the bank and all that. I get a call from that same guy, okay, who calls me one day and says, hey, leaves me a message, says, I heard you went by and visited with so-and-so at the bank, and we'd like you to come back. And I'm like, what the hell? How does he know that I went? I mean, I get on the phone and I call him up. I said, how did you know that I was at that bank? He goes, listen, it's a small town. Here's the thing. We want you to come back and talk to us again about, your business. And I said, well, but he said he can't even touch my rates. I'd appreciate it if you go back and speak to the guy again. And I said, you're the type of person we'd like to have as a customer, as a client. I said, but he said he couldn't. He goes, listen, I don't know if you're hearing me, but I need you to go and talk to the guy again. I said, well, he said, look, let's just get down to brass tacks. My father's the largest shareholder in that bank, and I'm on the board of directors. Now, will you get yourself back over there as soon as you can?
That's going to do it for part 1 of Bruce's interview with the outspoken investor, Tony Alvarez. Please be sure to check in next week for part 2. Thank you.
For more information on hard money loans and upcoming events with the Norris Group, check out thenorrisgroup.com. For information on passive investing with trust deeds, visit tngtrustdeeds.com.
The Norris Group originates and services loans in California and Florida under California DRE License 012-19911, Florida Mortgage Lender License 1577, and NMLS License 1623669. For more information on hard money lending, go to thenorrisgroup.com and click the Hard Money tab.